Once again, everybody, and welcome back. Today will be our final portion of notes before our exam. Well, Unit 3 test, not exam. And just so we're clear, I want to show you what we're looking at on Schoology. And this is just simply your Schoology page. And if you look at today's date, we're going to do our notes. And today we're going to talk about some transcendentalism, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and some of the American literature that and also we'll continue some of the reforms that spawn out of the Second Great Awakening. And tomorrow, I'm going to give you, I know it's been kind of a hectic week for us. So tomorrow, I'm going to give you the entire day to prepare for your test, which will be on Monday. Your test itself is going to be 40 multiple choice questions. Some of them will have, graphs, charts, maps, excerpts. Some are just questions that you're going to know. So it's kind of a mix of questions that I've created and questions taken from your previously released AP exams. In addition to that, I'm going to give you 55 minutes to complete your 40 question multiple choice test. So not too extremely, you're not very extremely constrained on your time. So that's what's coming at you on Monday. So make sure that you prepare for that tomorrow, giving you the entire day. And then after that, I'll send out your next set of outlines. I've given you kind of a break on that for a while, so hopefully you're refreshed and ready to get back into completing those. So and hopefully you've taken the opportunity to keep fresh on the information from Unit 3. All right, so that being said, let's finish up Unit 3 today. And when we last left, we were discussing some of the prison reforms that had come about, and other reforms that had come about as a result of the Second Great Awakening. We mentioned, Dorothea Dix and the reforms that she did in prison. We talked about some educational reforms that occurred. Today, we're going to look at some alcohol reforms or problems with drink, and the ever-present drink problem attracted a lot of dedicated reformers. When you come like this, thinking back to put yourself in the shoes of a person in 1840 and 50. Their lives were hard and monotonous, and these types of lives sometimes led to excessive drinking of hard liquor, even among women, clergymen, members of Congress. It was a pretty common scene for weddings and funerals to become disgraceful brawls because people were, drunk. It was not uncommon for the occasional mourner at a funeral to fall into the grave with the corpse. So, heavy drinking is not good for society in a variety of ways. In addition for the social aspects of it, but it also decreases the efficiency of labor. When I was in a guy that I looked up to when I was a child, he always said, never buy a car made on Monday, because the workers have been they're getting over their excesses of the weekend. So he says you never want to buy a car on Mondays, and it's because they may have been drinking, and heavy drinking decreases the efficiency of labor. And imagine yourself not with your wits, and you're around all this poorly safeguarded machinery, and you're operating heavy machinery under the influence of alcohol, increases the danger of accidents occurring at work. Drunkenness also fouls the sanctity of the family. It threatens people's spiritual welfare as well as physical safety, particularly among women and children. So after early efforts to try to make some reforms, in 1826, the American Temperance Society was formed. Okay? And what the American Temperance Society does is they have people to sign what's known as a temperance pledge, and they become known as what's called the Cold Water Army. So they're, obviously cold water. That's what you're going to drink. You're going to drink the cold water. So it's during this time that you begin to hear expressions emerge like falling off the wagon. In this time period, most roads were dirt. throughout cities, and as a result of that, there's a lot of dust and filth, and so occasionally the city would employ a wagon to come by that was full of water, carrying water, and they would spray the city down to keep the dust. And so, since that wagon was full of water, if you were on the wagon, you were drinking water. But if you fell off the wagon, that's when you went back to drinking alcohol. So that's where that expression comes from. So, they the Second Great Awakening and these reformers really demonize alcohol. They even call it the demon drink or demon rum, and um, and there was different varying degrees of reformers. There were reformers that called for moderation, to temper your consumption of alcohol, hence the name temperance movement. And then there were these people that were called teetotalers, or very people that had great zeal, and they came to believe that alcohol should be totally eliminated as it was an intoxicant, and it should be eliminated by legislation. So a lot of these alcohol reforms came about as a result of the Second Great Awakening, and they do gain some gravitas in the coming years, but ultimately it is successful. A little foreshadowing because of the 19th Amendment, the Prohibition Amendment. So just kind of this is like the origins of those alcohol reforms. Yesterday we talked about Dorothea Dix and her prison reforms, and today we'll continue moving on with the Seneca Falls Convention. The Seneca Falls Convention was a meeting that occurred in Seneca Falls, New York, in 1848, and it also, and it has to do entirely with women. The 19th century was a man's world, and it remained a man's world throughout the entire century, both in America and in Europe. The cult of domesticity had firmly entrenched itself into American social life. But a lot of women felt like they deserved to have a voice in government. And so people like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, these suffragettes, women who wanted to see themselves have a right to vote, Lucretia Mott, they all wanted to have this voting right, and they thought the best way that they could do that is through unity and solidarity. And so a meeting was called in Seneca Falls, New York, in 1848, where these women came together and they drafted a Declaration of Grievances, which they modeled after the Declaration of Independence. And basically, one of the lines from it is that all men and women are created equal. So now, obviously, this is 1848. Women do not gain the right to vote until 1920, so they have a ways to go. Many of these women never earned the right to vote, but they laid the foundation for future suffragettes. They had to wait a very long time in order to get their voting rights. So, but that's what these women did, and they were on the forefront of gaining voting rights for women. Okay, all right. So moving on into transcendentalism, I call this a bunch of isms because it's a lot of vocabulary. Okay, so we're talking about transcendentalism, which is started out. It was one of the people responsible for it was Ralph Waldo Emerson. You can see that he's right here, and he was a Unitarian minister, and he started this thought system, this philosophy of transcendentalism, where you just kind of listen to yourself, you make your own decisions, and you look inward for answers as opposed to outward, or opposed to a divine being for answers. So he believed truth could be found in your heart through your emotional life. So Emerson, he he's from Boston, and this whole thing started out in the Northeast. Um, Transcendentalism stresses self-reliance, self-improvement, self-confidence, optimism, freedom. Um, he wants to. He's a very outspoken critic of slavery. He believes that truth transcends your senses, and you can't find truth through observation alone. Just because you can see, smell, hear, taste, or touch it doesn't necessarily make it true. All right, now this definitely plays into second great awakening ideas, where people like Charles Grandison Finney were whipping people into an emotional frenzy in their conversion experiences. Well, Ralph Waldo Emerson simply takes that a step further, and believes that God and Jesus and all that is great, but real truth can be found by how you feel. So emotional, all about emotionalism, having an emotional connection to something. Okay, so Ralph Waldo Emerson, this was kind of a fairly controversial idea, but it was very popular amongst well-trained, educated people of the Northeast. So, he believed that these people, if you're educated and you're working hard, that you should be entitled to a position, entitled to a job. And he's like a spokesman for the values of 19th century New England. Okay, and he influences a lot of things that have happened in American culture. Now, American culture today, unfortunately, is really social media, and people are influenced greatly by that. Whereas in the 1850s, 40s, 50s, 60s, books were the social media of the day. It's how ideas were spread, and people like Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, this gentleman right here, he was one of the most popular authors of the day. Professor who for many years taught modern languages at Harvard. He had lived a pretty serene life, with the exception of the tragic deaths of two wives that he had. Not at the same time. He had a wife and then she passed. He had another wife and she passed. The second of which passed away right in front of him when her dress caught on fire and she burned alive in front of him, which was, as you would imagine, very tragic. But his widespread knowledge of European literature supplied him with a lot of themes. He wrote books like Evangeline, The Song of Hiawatha, The Courtship of Miles Standish, and even Paul Revere's Ride. I'm not a big fan of Paul Revere's Ride because this is where the myth of Paul Revere, riding and warning the British comes from. He did ride and did warn about the British coming, but he did not ride at the distance in which Longfellow says. The Courtship of Miles Standish is awesome. It's a great little short. It's kind of a short story. It's about Miles Standish came on the Mayflower. It's just kind of a story about how Miles Standish established the colony, and how he was an Indian fighter, and how his right hand man was in love with a girl who was betrothed to Miles Standish. It was kind of a love story too, but that guy he couldn't go against Miles Standish because he was such a hero to the people of the Puritan colony. Song of Hiawatha is kind of a poem, and it has to do with, obviously, Native Americans. And if the way you read it, it's like it goes to a Native American beat. It's like, I don't know if you can hear me slapping the desk, but it's like you read it to that beat. I can't remember much of it from the top of my head, but it's like by the shores of Gitche Gumee, by the roaring Big Sea waters, to the wigwam of Tacoma, and that's about all I know. So, but yeah, it's a long poem, and you read it to that kind of cadence, and There's a word for that in literature. I don't know what that is, where you read it to a certain cadence. But what Longfellow, also a transcendentalist, influenced by um, Ralph Waldo Emerson. All right, Louisa May Alcott. She obviously was, is a female. She was a very popular woman writer, and her work remains enormously popular today, tied to this New England literary world. Um, she 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 wrote Little Women, um, and it's still required reading in a lot of high schools and colleges today. She's from Concord, Massachusetts, right in the bosom of transcendentalism, with her neighbors Emerson and Thoreau and Fuller and all the other, Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes. They're all contemporaries with one another. Okay. Emily Dickinson, she was a poet who did not live very far away from Louisa May Alcott. She lived in Amherst, Massachusetts, but she lived as a recluse, like almost like a hermit, very very private by herself. She created her own original works of poetry, very simple rhyme schemes, deceptively spare language, and she explored universal themes about life and love and death and nature and immortality. She did not publish a single poem in her lifetime, but when she died, nearly 2,000 of them were found amongst her papers and eventually made their way into print. One of my favorites is, he's probably the most noteworthy figure produced by the South and then before the Civil War. Now, as he was in Maryland, which was considered the South as it was a slave state. But it's Edgar Allan Poe. He is regarded as a Southerner, quantitatively at least, and he had about 82 books that flowed from his pen. Among them, probably most famous was The Raven, which is my favorite poem. But he suffered himself from hunger, cold, poverty, debt, alcoholism. He attempted suicide and failed at that, and so he took refuge in a bottle. Here's some of his more famous works. But basically, like, he would have these alcohol-fueled nightmares in his sleep. He'd get very intoxicated and sleep and have dreams, and when he would awake, he would write about the things he saw, and they were terrifying. And like The Raven, very, very terrible, about a guy who lost someone he loved, and he basically is driven into madness. He slowly slips into it, and the form of this madness, where his rationality begins to escape him, takes in the form of a raven. So, but he's from Maryland. That's why, like the Baltimore Ravens. There's no Ravens in Maryland, but Edgar Allan Poe was from Maryland, and that's why the football team is the Baltimore Ravens. Okay, Nathaniel Hawthorne. He is another author that reflects the continuing Calvinist struggle with original sin and the never-ending struggle between good and evil. As his masterpiece was, of course, The Scarlet Letter, which describes the Puritan practice of an adulteress wearing a large red A on her clothing. And it's a tragic tale, and it chronicles the psychological effects of sin on the guilty. And her secret lover, the father of her baby, who was a minister in the gospel, a minister in the Puritan faith. So pretty popular. You've probably read it already in your own educational careers. Herman Melville, he was orphaned. He's from New York, so he's one of the few that's not from New England. But he's not a very well-educated man. But as a young man, he went to sea and served 18 months on a whaling ship. 18 adventure-filled months as a whaler. And, he was a charming guy, and he could write charming tales. And his masterpiece was, of course, Moby Dick, an epic novel of the complex allegory between good and evil, man and nature, or Captain Ahab versus the giant white whale, Moby Dick. Captain Ahab lost his leg to the marine monster and only lives for revenge. And his pursuit finally ends with, I don't want to ruin the book, but I guess I will. He ends with Moby Dick, when Moby Dick rams and sinks Ahab's ship, leaving only one survivor. And it's a pretty terrifyingly impersonal and unknowable universe of Melville's imagination, and it just kind of simply continues on. So, if you've never read it, I had to read it a long time ago, but I remember enjoying it. So, lots of literary lights emerge out of the Second Great Awakening and transcendentalism through the influence of Ralph Waldo Emerson. So that's what I have for today. That's the end of Unit 3. We made it, and be looking for a Unit 3 test on Monday, and then after that we'll prepare for a 4-hour semester exam, I believe. I have not received a semester exam schedule yet, but as soon as I'm aware of it, you will be aware of it, and we will continue on from there. And as always, I'm available to you all day tomorrow, all day today. If you need me, please don't hesitate to contact me with questions. If you have questions about the test, whatever, I'm here to help you. I want to see you be successful. All right, so I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later.